Daf Sadi Amud Aleph and Amud Bet. Fundamentalism and reason. Xasma מבחוץ mahu. The Torah is not a set of fundamentalist rules and narrative, but we will see from three psukim, three halachot, three laws that we're going to learn in the Torah this morning, and how the Gemara in its unique way sees the Torah as an integrated system. And even though these three halachot seem to be completely disconnected, we'll understand how they impact one another. And in so doing, we understand some of the reasons for the halachot and the mitzvot. The first is lo tachsom shor b'dishor. This connects to the Gemara we've been learning about how a po'el, how an employee has to work in a field, his right to be able to eat while he works, and exactly what the boundaries of that halacha is. The same applies, lahavdil, with an animal. If one's employing an animal to work in a field, lo tachsom shor b'dishor, you cannot muzzle the ox or any other animal while it's working in the field. It has to be free to eat. That's one halacha. Separate halacha. Yain v'shechar al teish tatar vanecha itach. You may not drink, this is an instruction to the Kohanim, wine or beer, any alcoholic beverage, you may not drink, you or your children after you, the Kohanim in future generations. Bevo'achem el oil moed, when you come into the Mishkan or later the Beis HaMikdash, v'lo tamutu, so that you do not die. Chukat olam l'doratechem, this is a permanent law for your generations. And this is something that will enable you to properly distinguish between that which is kodesh, that which is holy and sanctified, and that which is secular and ordinary, and that which is tameh, which is forbidden, and that which is pure. Third law, V'iktir alav Aaron ktoret samim baboker, and the Aaron will bring the incense offering every morning, behetivo et hanerot yaktirenu, while he is preparing the candles for lighting for the menorah, he will bring the incense offering as well. Three disconnected halachot. Says our Gemara on Amud Aleph, Ba'u minei Rav Sheshet. They asked Rav Sheshet, the kasha. What was the kasha? Hayta ochelet umatrezet mahu. If the animal had severe diarrhea, and it isn't good for the animal to eat in the field, so he wants to muzzle the animal so that it doesn't eat in the field. It's for the animal's benefit that he's muzzling it. Mishum demalilahu v'holo malila. Perhaps, what is the reason for having to muzzle an ox? Is it because eating is good for the animal? And in this case, it wouldn't be good for the animal, so he's not doing anything wrong. Or dilma dechazio mitztaro, perhaps it's about the suffering. Just seeing food and not being able to eat it. And for an animal, the animal doesn't understand it's got diarrhea and it shouldn't be eating. So the animal sees the food and wants the food and can't get to the food. That's an issur. For Chazio Mitztara, Omalu Rav Sheshet Tinitu Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, and the Gemara says we've learned from a brayso with Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Mevi Karshanim v'Tolela Shakarshanim Yafot La Mina Kol Shma Mina Mishum Demali Lahu Shma Mina. You see from the din of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai that the reason for not muzzling an ox is because it's good for it to eat, and you shouldn't prevent it from doing that which is good for it. And therefore, in the case where the ox has severe diarrhea, it's fine to muzzle the ox so that it doesn't eat. You're not transgressing the issur. This is a very difficult Gemara to understand because it depends on the principle of whether dorshim tama dikra or not. What does dorshim tama dikra means? There's a discussion in the Gemara as to whether we use philosophy to resolve halachic issues. The issue is not whether halacha has a philosophy. We'll see in the Ramban, of course, every halacha has a philosophy. There's a reason for every halacha. The Rebbeinu Shalom is not irrational. Everything he told us to do, there's reason for. But can we use the reasoning in making a halachic decision? Or do we have to make halachic decision mathematically, axiomatically? And we go that you can't use the reasoning to decide halachic issues. But this Gemara seems to take for granted that you do. Because what's the Gemara talking about? A halachic issue. Can you muzzle an ox before? Can you muzzle an ox if it's severely diuretic, has severe diarrhea? Or not, and that depends on what the reason is. What is the philosophy of the mitzvah of lo tachsom? Why are we going into that? That's not the way to resolve the issue by looking at the philosophy. Says the Rosh, and brought in the Shita Mukubetet, Afilu leman delo darish tama dikra. Don't worry, says the Rosh. This has got nothing to do with the argument about whether you can use philosophy to resolve halachic issues. Of course, that's a machloket. It's not a machloket implies knowledgeable people. I won't even say it's a machloket. It's a controversy, let's say, among people today in terms of conservative and orthodox, and even parts of modern orthodox. to start using our understanding of what the philosophy is as to whether you should or you shouldn't or you can. We don't work that way. There is a method of resolving halakha, and the method is not by using philosophy. There's a mathematical method, and then the philosophy is extrapolated after you've worked out what the halakha is. But you don't use philosophy to work out halakha because that's far too subjective. But here says the Rosh, this has got nothing to do with that issue. It's obvious to the Gemara that the law of lo tachsom is for the good of the animal. It's obvious. This is not being dorish Talmud the Kra, it's just learning the Pasuk. The question is, what is the reason? What is it about the animal? Is it to stop the animal the suffering of not being able to eat when it wants to? Or is it to stop the animal not nourishing itself when it needs the nourishment? What is the reason? But for sure, says the Rosh, the Gemara understands, there's no question it's a tovat hashil behema. I saw this Rosh, I was astounded. Where is it so obvious? Why is it obvious to the Gemara? Where does the Gemara get it from that's so obvious? The Torah just says, lo tachsom shor b'disho. And now we're going along and saying that the question is it because the animal craves the food, or because the animal needs the food? Who said it has anything to do with the animal? This is a halakha, it's a gzeres hakosa from the Torah. We have to do what God wants us to do, and we can work the halakha out differently. Where does it come from? The answer I suggest comes from the next Amud, from Daf Tzadi Amud Beis. Bo mine Rabbi Yonasan mi Rabbi Simoy. Rabbi Yonatan asked Rabbi Simoy a question. Chasma מבחוץ mahu. What happens if you muzzle the animal before you bring it to the field? So it's not lo tachsom shor bedisho. The Torah says, now if we're going to learn axiomatically, then let's understand exactly what the Torah says. It says you cannot muzzle an ox while it is threshing, while it is plowing or threshing or working in the field. You can't do that. But if you muzzle it beforehand, 2 hours before you put the muzzle on, it's in the barn somewhere, no food anywhere to be seen, and then you take it into the field. Is that wrong? This is not the one side of the doubt, this is not bedisho. He's not busy doing anything, he's not working in the field. Or does the Torah mean, don't let an ox work in a field in a state of being muzzled? What does the Pasuk mean? Amar lo mi beit avicha ata lamed. Says Rabbi Samoy to Rabbi Yonasan, you know this from your father's house because you're a Kohen. There's a whole discussion as to whether he was or wasn't a Kohen, but that's what the Gemara says. Yain v'sheichar al teish tatao vanecha itcha bevoachem. It says in the Pasuk, you may not drink alcoholic drinks when you come to the Beis HaMikdash. Bevoachem hu da'asur. Does that mean only when you come into the Beis HaMikdash you can no longer drink, but it's to stop off at the bar on the way in? You're walking down Rehov Yafo towards the Beis HaMikdash, and you stop at a bar in Rehov Yafo there, or at Shar Yafo, you have a beer, you have a glass of wine, and then you go to the Beis HaMikdash. Now there's no wine in the Beis HaMikdash, chas v'sholom, no bars, no alcohol in the Beis HaMikdash, but you're semi-drunk already. Is that okay? Says the Gemara, no, says Rabbi Simoy. Look at the next pasuk. The Torah tells you so that you will be clear-minded enough to paskin shailas, to make halachic decisions. You can't make a halachic decision if your mind isn't clear. So what does it mean there? It means don't be drunk when you're in the Beis HaMikdash. Who cares whether you drank when you were there or you drank before you came in? Don't be in a state of shikrut when you're in the Beit HaMikdash. Here too, bishat tisha lo tehei chasima. So there, in the case of the law of the Kohen, as Rashi explains, it says, Patrektiv, mashma kedei sheyida lavchin ben avodah kedusha lemechollet, v'isha tivar b'ch, mekol makom shikuru v'lo yada lavdil. It's clear from the wording in the psukim that that's the reason for it. Don't become drunk, don't be influenced by alcohol, so that your mind is clear when you pass it. So that's fine. There the Torah gives us the reason. How can you learn from here to this case here where it simply says 4 words, lo tachsom shor b'disho? That's all it tells us. How can you apply the one law to the other law and here say, in the same way, it means that when you're threshing with this animal in the field, it shouldn't be muzzled. Maybe that's not what it means. What it means is you shouldn't muzzle it when in the field. How can you learn it from the case of the Kohen? Clearly what the Gemara is saying is it's learning what the bet means. When it says, Yain v'shechar al teish tato vanecha itach bevoachem, when you come. It doesn't mean when you come, it means while you're you're in the status. That bet is not a condition of don't drink before you come in. Bevoachem means in your being in the Beit HaMikdash, don't have drunk. Don't have been in a situation in which you've drunk. If that's what the bet means in this kind of construction of a sentence, then lo tachsom shor bedi shor, you've got the same kind of construct. When it says you mustn't muzzle an animal bedi shor while it's in the field, it doesn't mean that while it's doing it you can't put the muzzle on. It means you can't thresh with an animal in the field in a status where it is muzzle, just in the case of a kohen, because that's what the word bidishor, and we learn that from the posuk of the kohen in Parashat Shmini. We learn that that's the meaning of the word bet. When you've got this construction of bet, it doesn't mean that you can't do it while you're in the Beis HaMikdash. It means you can't be in the Beis HaMikdash having done it. You can't have an animal in the field having muzzled it. It doesn't matter when you muzzled it. It's the muzzling. Now what's important in that is that tells us what the reason is. And that's what comes out from Rav Simai's Chidush here. Because if the law was you can't muzzle the animal when it's in the field, but if you muzzle it before the field, it's okay, then we don't know what the reason is. It's not about the cruelty to animals. Because why can you muzzle it before? If you're not allowed to muzzle it before or during, then it's very clear. You can't have the animal working in the case of it being muzzled. So the question that Rabbi Yonason asks Rabbi Simoi is not only a factual question of what happens if you muzzle it before it came in, rather than in the field. There's a philosophic question. What is the reason for this muzzling? If there's no reason, Hashem says you can't do it, then you just take it literally. When it's in the field, you can't put a muzzle on. That's how you take it. But if the reason is it's cruelty to the animal, you're holding the animal back from being able to eat, whether because it's good for the animal or because the animal craves it, then you can't do it no matter whether it's before or it's after. Our answers, Rabbi Simoi, we see from Bevoachem that what it means here, that just as there's a reason given, Bevoachem, that when you come into the Beis HaMikdash you can't be drunk because your mind needs to be clear, so when you thresh with your animal in the field, B'dishor, it means the animal can't be in a state of being muzzling because it's bad for the animal. And what's important to know that Rabbi Simoi was a very early Amoiro. He was right after the time of the Tanoim, bridging that period of the Tanaim and the Amoraim. Rabbi Yonason was his talmid. So he's long before Rav Sheshis. So although the top Gemara is brought first on Amud Aleph, and then we come to Amud Beis later on, from a perspective of chronology, the Baimine Rabbi Yonason and Rabbi Simoi came first. So that principle is established already. We've established already by the principle of Rabbi Simoi that there's a reason for this halacha. This is not just a gzeras hakosuf. There is a reason. The reason is that you can't cause this pain to the animal. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether you put the muzzle on when it's in the field or before the field. But the principle that you've got to know is, this is about the animal. That's what the Rosh says. If you turn the next Omud, you'll learn from Rabbi Simoi that the principle here, and we reason it out from Parashat Shmini, from the law of the Kohanim, from there we will see very clearly that that the reason for lo tachsom is to not be cruel to the animal. It's not just a gzeras hakosov with the reason that we can't work, and therefore we're permitted to use the reason and to work with the reason. To indicate that I'm right in this approach is a comment in the Gilyonei Hashas, which is a little sefer. It was written by Rabbi Yosef Engel. Rabbi Yosef Engel was the Rav of Krakow before the First World War. And he wrote Atfin Doraisa, and he wrote Gilyonei Hashas. And he says, and the same applies in Yomi Daf Ayin Vav, where it says, Bahativo et haneirot, that while he's preparing the candles, the ktoret, the incense must be there. Does that mean while he's preparing the candles, you light the ktoret? The one kohen is preparing the candles, another kohen lights the ktoret. Or what happens if you light the ktoret before you prepare the candles? The Gemara says in Yuma, it's the same idea. Be'idan hatavata hemakater ktoret. The ktoret, the incense offering, must be burning during the time that you're preparing the candles. It must already be burning. How do you know that from? Because we've got the same bet. The same thing there. It's behetivo. So you see from the Gilyonei Hashas that he too learns Rabbi Simoi as giving us a general principle of this particular grammatical construct, that whenever you see the behetivo or bevoachem or bedisho, where there's something that has to be done while something else is happening, it means that it's not that it has to be done during the time that it's happening. It applies as well if it's done before the time that it's happening, because we're talking about this event, whether it's the threshing, or it's the coming into the Beis HaMikdash, or it's the lighting the candles in the menorah. While doing those, already the animal isn't allowed to be in a state of being muzzled. The person, the Kohen's not allowed to be in a state of drunkenness, and the Beis HaMikdash has to have the Torah around it. So we see it's a state of behetivo. So there we get an idea of how the Gemara works with reason. Generally, there's a reason to every halakha, but you can't use the reason in reasoning halachic consequence. But when it's clear in the posuk, in the verse, that's there, the reason is stated in the verse, then we do use the reason. There's no reason, but Rabbi Simoi learns from the case of Kohen that there is a reason, and that the reason is for the benefit of the animal. Now, the reason being for the benefit of the animal, one must always understand in the context of the Ramban in Parshas Ki Tetzei, which we have learned before, on Ki Karei Kan Tzipor, where the Ramban says, Gamzu mitzvah muvueret minoto ve'etz beno lo shechatu biyom echad, not taking the egg away from the bird in its presence is similar to the mitzvah of not slaughtering a parent and a child animal on the same day. Ki atam b'shnehem levilti hiyot lanu lev achzari v'lo nerachem. This is not about environmentalism. This is not about cruelty to animals. That's a different issue. Tzar B'Lechaim is a different issue. This is something much higher than that. This is about us. That we shouldn't develop a midah of achzariyut, a character trait of cruelty. And by doing cruel things, even to animals, one becomes cruel. And the Torah doesn't want that. This is about protecting us from the midah of cruelty. Every single mitzvah has a reason and a purpose, and it's in the interests of man. The mitzvot are not for the environment. The mitzvot are not for nature. Hashem built the environment so that it can look after itself. If you destroy the environment, it's wrong. You're not allowed to do that. But if you destroy the environment, it will kick you out. It will destroy you. You don't have to worry about environmentalism as such. Other than that, one has to be a mensch. You don't waste, you don't destroy, you don't pollute. That's something you do as a mensch. But that's not the reason for the mitzvahs. The reason for the mitzvahs is to make you a greater mensch, to make us greater menschen. When we don't know the reason for a mitzvah, it's just because we don't understand it. We're not clear enough. The reason is always for man. Mitzvah is to avoid damage to a man, to a human being, or to avoid a bad belief, or a bad character trait, or to remember the miracles of Hashem, and to know Hashem. Those are the reasons for the mitzvot. So we must understand the context. When the Rosh says, Pshita derachmano lo yizar ela letovata shel behema, it doesn't mean that the Torah was designed to give the cow a good time. The Torah was designed in such a way that we don't do things that damage our animal while the animal's working for us. The animal's doing something for us. The animal's helping us. We're not allowed to do anything which is not in the interests of the animal, not for the animal's sake. That's Tzar B'Lechaim, different halakha. This halakha is for our sake, because if we abuse an animal while we're working with the animal, we'll come to do the same with human beings. We'll develop the midah, we'll develop the character trait, and that's what we're not allowed to do. All of that learned from this little halakha, this little only in terms of the space it occupies in the Torah, not in terms of its importance, of course. Lo tachsom shor b'disho. You're not permitted to muzzle an animal while you're working with it in the field.